Okay, Grandma, thank you for chatting with me tonight. You are on a special recording of the Speech Guys, where our speech is going to be talking about Franklin Roosevelt's first fireside talk on the banking crisis. So, Grandma, I'm going to mostly just let you talk. And to kind of start things off, will you introduce yourself and include your birthday and how old you were at the start of the Great Depression and the end of the Great Depression, roughly, which is roughly 1933 to 1941, we'll say.
Well, my name is Audrey Tinoco, and at the beginning of the Depression, I guess I was about, as far as I can remember, about 8 years old.
So 1930, you were born in 1926, right?
Right.
Right. So okay, seven and a half, right at the start of the Depression. Yep.
Well, what I remember during the Depression,
Well, I was just getting the age clarified there. And so in 1941, when people kind of say the Depression ended, how old were you when Pearl Harbor was bombed?
the Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I guess I was about 16.
Mm-hmm. What do you remember about Pearl Harbor being bombed?
Well, I was in the living room with my mother and her couple of daughters
Mm-hmm.
where that was bombed. And so we had some GIs from Scott Field there
Mm-hmm.
that my sister had working with her at the field. And, well, we were just stunned. And we started saying a prayer because there was so many boys being in that war
Right. Yeah.
at Pearl Harbor.
Were you expecting the United States to go to war as soon as that happened?
Well, they were kind of they were drafting the boys then.
Already? You mean,
Oh yeah,
huh?
they were drafting the boys. So they were, and the boat was bombed,
Right. Yeah.
and there were boys from Belleville, and a priest, Father Drone,
Mm-hmm.
was one of them that they captured, and there was a boy by the name of Cooney, which was in the service of some kind, and so he was killed in that, and he belonged to the same church I belonged to, St. Mary's.
Huh.
Yeah.
That priest that you mentioned, he was captured.
In the Philippines.
Oh, I see.
He was
Okay.
a Lake,
Yeah.
and he was from Belleville,
Uh-huh.
Father Drone.
Yeah.
And later on, I learned that they had killed him.
Oh, goodness.
Oh,
You know how long he was a POW before he was killed?
no,
Hmm. Wow.
like at that time, I was, I guess I was about 15 then.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Going back to the start of the Great Depression, um, can you tell our audience how many older siblings you had, where you were at in the line in terms of oldest to youngest?
Well, I had two, let me see, I had two, two older sisters, and I had two older brothers than me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a younger sister. There were six of us children
Mm-hmm.
in the family.
Right.
And so before you know it, they would start drafting. But my one brother, when he was 17, he was killed in an accident at home.
Right.
But my other brother, Arnold, as soon as he turned to 21, they start drafting.
Was Uncle Arnold excited to go to the
No,
war? No. Was he scared? What was his emotions like?
He just wasn't happy about it.
Yeah.
But at that time, every time you turned 21, you had to sign up
Mm-hmm.
for the service.
Right.
And so he had signed up, and my brother-in-law, Leroy, my older sister's husband, he had to sign up.
Mm-hmm.
And so uh, those two were in the service right away.
Right. We forgot to announce for our audience your birthday. I know 1926, we said the year you're born. I know it was
Yeah.
May 27th?
May 26th,
Ah,
1926.
there we go for our audience, just to get that down paper, which makes you almost 95 and a half for those not doing the math quickly. And she's a spry 95 and a half, just for our audience to know. So,
Thank you.
so during the Great Depression, you were about the ages of 8 to 15 or 16. What sort of memories do you have from the 8 to 10-year range? What was school like for you?
Well, it was just regular grade school. I went to St. Mary's Catholic School, and it was just a regular grade school,
Hmm?
you know.
What did you eat for breakfast? What did you eat for lunch? What were your meals like on around that age?
Well, we had cornflakes. They're cornflakes or cream of wheat, but most of the time it was cornflakes.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd have just enough milk that we could put in our cornflakes. Because my dad only made $12 a week, and there were 8 of us. There were 6 kids and my mom and dad. And mom made all our clothes and did all our darning. And my dad would fix our shoes and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
there was at the dime store, you got a, a, a sole that you could glue onto your shoe at the bottom. And well, unfortunately, it didn't stick very good.
Mm-hmm.
So the hole at the bottom would be about as big as a half a dollar in your shoes.
Yeah.
So we take some layers of newspaper and fold them. And but if it rained, by the time we got to school, our feet were soaking wet.
Even if it didn't rain, I can't imagine newspaper lasting very long.
It didn't.
Yeah.
It was just about the concrete. It would
Right.
wear a hole, but
Mm-hmm. So remind me what your dad did for a living.
my father,
Mm-hmm.
uh, well, before I was born, he was a coal miner. But after I was born, he quit the coal mining and worked for my uncle, Fred.
Mm.
And my dad would haul coal and ice
Right.
on a truck. And they had only made $12 a week then.
Coal mining was a pretty big industry or job around here, right?
Well, at that time, but it
At
was
that time,
also
yeah.
dangerous.
Right. Yeah.
It didn't have all the safety factors it's got now.
Do you know if any of your dad's coworkers died or got hurt in any coal mining accidents?
I don't know. It was more or less a family thing. My great grandpa and all of them, they worked in the mines.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if anybody ever got killed or anything.
Yeah.
But when my sister Thelma was born and growing up, that's when my dad decided to quit.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So
So your mom stayed at home and made a lot of the clothing.
she made all our clothing and all our underwear
Mm-hmm.
and patched all our socks and darned them.
Mm-hmm. But you said we were talking on the phone earlier, in the week, and we were talking about, remember, Grandma, that I know a lot of this stuff, but for our audience, we're filling in different things. But she did work sometimes. She worked for the elections,
My mother did.
at least once, several times.
I only worked once for him,
Mm-hmm.
but my mother used to work every election because it was extra money. And then when Roosevelt decided to run the third term, my mother wouldn't work for him because she said no man's worth the third term.
Right. Yeah. And we were trying to remember the other day who Roosevelt would have run against for his third term that she might have voted for, but
No,
no, don't remember. Any other jobs that your mom had other than working elections?
well, if there were coupons to be delivered to homes of different samples, they were advertising, and they have coupons, or my mom would work to uh, deliver the coupons, and like if it was a bar of soap to the homes.
Mm-hmm.
And that was extra money because $12 with a family of 8.
Yeah, that's crazy. I should see what that is adjusted for inflation, $12 per week. What was the neighborhood like where you grew up?
It was a nice neighborhood. People kept their yards nice,
Mm-hmm.
and well, they let the dogs and cats ring loose. And my mother could not stand that.
Were there a lot of like, would you basically say wild dogs and cats that,
No,
no, okay. Yeah, just a lot.
the neighbors next door, neighbors behind her, neighbors across the street, they all had a cat.
It's sort of surprising during this time, right? Because it's a depression and an animal, a pet costs money to feed, or I guess they just fed them garbage or
No,
they,
there was no such thing as um, cat
right.
food.
Yeah.
Just fed her right from the table.
Yeah. You guys never had any pet growing up, did you?
We know.
Oh, okay. What was his name? That's right. That sounds familiar.
Uh, he would just eat from the table.
Mm-hmm.
There was no such thing as dog food. People couldn't afford that kind of stuff.
So, s- did you think of yourselves as middle class? Like, to what extent were you aware that the United States was in the midst of this depression?
I wasn't aware of it because
Mm-hmm.
I never really understood all that. Because my mother she always made our bread
Hmm.
and handle our food. So my mother managed very good, very well,
Right.
So
Hmm. Um, and your dad, so unemployment in the United States was, I think, 26% at its highest during this time. And you said that your dad switched jobs from coal mining to delivery guy for coal and ice, but he was never unemployed during the Depression, right?
my dad was never
Right.
unemployed
Hmm. Gotcha.
because he worked for my own.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But like I said, $12 a week for 8 people. But my mother was a very good manager. I mean, she would can our food. She would make our bread. She would make all our clothes, including our underwear.
Mm-hmm.
And so we always seemed like we had.
When you were growing up, were you, because I'd imagine that St. Mary's, there was a pretty big mix of like rich kids, poor kids in between.
Was no rich kids. They
Hmm.
were better off than I was.
Yeah.
But it never really, well, I guess I shouldn't mention people's names.
Probably not.
Yeah. And one person owned his own business. And so naturally, those kids had more money and everything.
Was there anything you remember that the kids who had a little more money, do you remember wanting certain things that they had? Anything in particular?
No, it was like at Christmas time, and that they'd bring the nuns presents,
Yeah,
which we couldn't afford,
right.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. But they never had anything that I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
I was happy.
Right.
It, and since my dad worked on the truck, he would deliver stuff to wealthier families, and whatever they threw in in the trash, like Dad would bring home maybe a toaster they threw away,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't have a toaster, or maybe a tricycle, and it still worked.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my dad bringing home the tricycle out of the dump that they threw away,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So we never really wanted.
So going back to your neighborhood a little bit. So for audience, Belleville, where my grandma grew up, today has a population of about 40,000. And back then, do you have any guess of what the population was?
In Belleville at that time, probably around 25,000.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, if Mercy Scott Field was out there.
Right. Yeah. In your neighborhood, what was the house like that you grew up in?
The house
Mm-hmm.
is still standing there, very nice. And it's the people that bought it since my dad I died keep it very well.
What street is that on?
22nd Street, South 22nd Street.
I'm sure my mom has driven me by it. I feel I should visit that again. I'm sure.
Yeah, and we were all born and raised in it, except my youngest sister.
Mm-hmm.
She was born in the hospital because my grandma was found dead in her bed. And so my grandpa thought she was sleeping. And my mother had told me to go get grandma to help her wash. And when I went over there, my grandpa said, "No, she's sleeping."
This was happening while your mom was about to give birth.
So they
Gosh.
had to rush my mom to the hospital. And then
Yeah.
my youngest sister was born.
Yeah. Geez, that's a lot to happen at once. Your grandma dying and Mickey, right? So the
Yeah.
younger one being born. Let's see. So that was your mom's mom or your dad's mom that had
My
died?
mother's mom.
Man, so how did she process that, her child being born and then her
Well, it wasn't. It was just that they had played cards the night before.
uh-huh.
And then the next morning, or with my mother being pregnant, my grandma always helped her with the
Mhm.
wash.
Yeah.
And when I went over to get her, my grandpa said, "No, she's sleeping."
Mhm. Right.
Well, with that, then I went home and told my mom. And when came outside, she knew something was wrong because grandpa was walking up and down the
Mm.
porch.
Yeah.
And so my mother went into labor.
Uh-huh.
And so she went to the hospital. Ambulance was called. They took my mother to the hospital, and that's when
Hmm.
my youngest sister, Virginia, was born.
Um, so I'm sure your mom must have had something of a hard time with that, having the experience of giving birth, but then losing your mom at the same time. Jeez. And I met your grandma was how old was your grandma when she died?
53.
Mm. Just a kid.
I think my mother was only 60.
Right. Um, the house where you lived in, I know you didn't have your own bedroom. How many bedrooms did you have in your house?
It had 2 bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, and a bath. and upstairs that later my dad and my brother made steps to go up, and then that they put a floor in, and then the 2 rooms were put up there, but they didn't have any walls in, so it was kind of hot.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But
Gosh.
with 4 girls and 2 boys, there kind of time that the bedroom had to be divided.
Hmm.
You know,
Who did you share a bedroom with?
with 3 sisters.
Yes. That's incredible.
Uh, we all moved up to the attic, and my brothers were in the other room.
Hmm.
But my brother went into the service. And my oldest sister got married. And her
Hmm.
husband went to service. So,
What do you remember about the different chores that you had growing up?
well, we'd have to, when we came home from school on a Monday, we had an iron. And on Saturdays and that, we'd have to clean the living room and the dining room and the bedrooms, change your bedding, and do the dusting and vacuuming.
Would you say that your mom was a super clean person or averagely clean?
Well, I would say average because she made sure the house was always clean.
Hmm.
The floors got scrubbed once a week,
Yeah.
and the house got vacuumed every week and dusted. And on Saturdays, we'd have to clean the bathroom, the tubs, and the toilets. And,
Do you remember any friends coming over, either your parents' friends or your friends?
well, yeah, Mom had friends that lived across the alley, and Dad and Mom and the friends across the, they'd play cards every week.
Mhm.
You know,
And what was your social life like? What kind of game, where did you usually play? What kind of games did you like to play? What was your entertainment like during this time period?
what age you get?
Right, yeah, we're talking eight to 15 or so.
We played marbles and we played baseball and hopscotch. But when I got a little older, my friends lived across the alley then. They moved in and we'd go to the CYO baseball games
Hmm.
at Southside Park. And actually, as I got older, my enjoyment changed,
Yeah,
you know.
different interests.
But I'd always go to the CYO baseball.
Hmm.
Yeah.
When you see, so we've pretty well established that you didn't necessarily have many material things, but you guys had a pretty happy, you were pretty content with what you had,
Right.
right?
Uh,
So
we were a very happy family.
when you see kids today with so much more material things than you could possibly imagine, what are some thoughts that you have?
They have too much stuff.
Hmm.
They they should learn to do without a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
But it's our farm. Yeah. I can hear your grandfather, my husband Jesse. Uh, he died about 7 years ago, and I can just hear him when he sees how the kids are growing up now. Those kids nowadays, I can just hear him say that.
I think I say it for him now.
You say that too?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I can still see him sitting over in that corner and saying, those kids nowadays, even the older ones, they have a job and then they quit it and go
Hmm.
to another job. And now I ask, well, why did he do that? Well, he just said he wanted to change.
Yeah.
And like I say, Those kids nowadays.
That's me. I'm a statistic in that example. Somewhat. We didn't talk about birthdays and holidays growing up. What were those like during this time period?
When I was growing up,
Yeah, 8 to 15.
well, each member of my family had our own kind of cake. Like every birthday, my cake was baked strawberry shortcake, which I get nowadays around 90.
True.
And my oldest sister, hers was banana. And my other sister was chocolate. And I don't remember what my youngest sister was.
Mhm.
And my one brother, he liked chocolate too.
Was ice cream ever something you got to eat?
We would get ice cream, and then the ice cream van would go through the neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
and we used to be able to get ice cream home
Mm-hmm.
now and then.
Hmm.
You know.
Holiday, Christmas, Thanksgiving, anything you remember about that in particular?
Well, we always had a nice Christmas. And we were so young, we always thought Santa Claus brought the tree and everything.
You remember what age you stopped believing in Santa Claus?
Oh boy, I would say 6, maybe.
6? That's definitely younger than me. I was 8, 8.5.
See,
So,
it's so hard to remember this. We used to, well, our dining room and living room were connected. So therefore, the tree was put up and we were not allowed.
mm-hmm.
And we'd stick our nose by the keyhole and we say, oh, we smell it. We smell the wine. We got older. But we were young, even though at Christmas time, we always got something.
Mm-hmm.
Dolls or I remember a doll buggy and roller skates and stuff like that.
Do you remember a favorite toy of yours growing up?
A doll buggy.
Probably, yeah. Um, did your older siblings work at all while they still lived at home to help provide income?
After they got out of high school, um, my oldest sister got a job at the brewery as a telephone operator. She worked over at the brewery, and my brother got a job at the brewery, and my other brother helped my dad on the coal and ice, dealer with coal and ice. And then when Thelma got out of high school, she got a good civil service job out at Scottsdale. And but when I got out of high school, I worked out at the Shrine of Our Lady of Snow,
And what did you do at the shrine?
typing, filing,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that.
And this would be a topic for another episode, but Aunt Thelma slash Aunt Duffy, as we called her, she went on to work for the CIA, right?
Well, she was for the government. I don't know if it was CIA, but I know when she get put on a job that was secret, they'd come around in the neighborhood and ask the neighbors
Mm-hmm.
if they knew anything about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll have to clarify that detail with my mom then. I always heard CIA, but
I don't even think we heard of the CIA.
yeah. But she is buried at Arlington, which is a pretty big deal for
With her
sure.
husband.
Mm-hmm. Um, so our speech for this episode is FDR's first fireside chat, which was on the radio. And we talked a little bit about this on the phone. You don't because you're obviously aware, but you're still a kid. You don't remember his fireside chats when they were happening.
No, I
Right.
just know they happened, and I don't know anything about them.
Mm-hmm.
I was too young at that time.
So obviously your mom voted for Roosevelt the first 2 times. Do you remember your dad's politics?
Well, yeah, he would vote for the Democrats,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and well, those days the Democrats were the best party to vote for.
Why do you say that?
Well, they really did the most for the people,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And like I said, my mother worked every week because she'd pick up people, and the person she worked with had a car, and they take the people to the election poll so they could vote.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you missed being old enough to vote for Roosevelt, but do you remember who you voted for in your first time you voted? What election that was? Let's see.
Well, my first election I voted for,
I guess it would have been the one after Roosevelt's
I
third term.
support,
Yeah, I guess that'd sound about right.
and then Truman.
Yeah, Truman did. Well, obviously he went in because he was vice president, but then he did run again on his own after. Yeah.
Truman.
Yeah. Yes, obviously he did. Yeah. Yeah, so Truman would have been your first election, I guess. Um, so this is a little bit outside of the scope of this particular podcast, but we'll record some of this just because it's good to record. And we talked about this recently, but obviously after Pearl Harbor, the war begins to take place, and that's obviously how you met Grandpa. How did you, and again, I know this, of course, but how did you meet Grandpa?
I had just got finished working at the dime store. And two of my friends and I, we came out the door, and these three GIs came along, and they started talking to us, and they walked with us, and we talked, and got acquainted. And then finally I said, well, I got to go home. And so that was the end of that. And then the following week, when I came out of work, there were these two GIs, and one was just Tinoco. And he said, well, you girls like to go to the ice cream parlor. We said, okay. So then when we start talking to that, Jesse said, well, I don't remember you being with the boys the week before. And I said, well, I was. And he said, could I have your phone number? And I thought, well, he's a pretty nice guy. So I gave him my phone number.
He was pretty nice, but was he good looking as well? Oh, I know he is for our audience.
So from then on, every week.
Mm-hmm. And Grandpa obviously was not from Belleville. Where was Grandpa from?
Rape station, what they call rape station. Oh, you're my husband?
Yeah.
Oh, he was from Texas.
Rape station. What was that referring to, though?
Well, that was my dad.
Oh, okay.
But
Gotcha.
my husband, Jesse, was from Texas, Victoria, Texas.
Near San Antonio.
Right.
So you guys say, what sort of things did you guys do on dates?
Go to the show.
The Lincoln Theater, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you meant? Show? Yeah.
And then we'd come out of there and go to Sutton's ice cream parlor and have an ice cream cone. And then we'd go home, catch the bus up at the square.
And he lived on Scott Air Force Base, right?
Oh, he was a GI.
Well, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And how long was he at Scott before? So now I'm sure you remember me interviewing Grandpa on this when I was a senior in high school. Do you remember that? So I know he was at, obviously, Scott. He was at Foster Air Force Base in Texas doing training as well, right?
Well, yeah, before he got out of Scott, he was at Foster, and they would train these boys for flyers. And so, but after they graduated from there, and your grandpa had high grades and everything, but then they decided they didn't need them anymore.
Right.
So then they gave him no choice. Or do you want to go to radio school or what? So Jesse took radio school, and that's how he got out of Scottsdale.
Right. I remember him saying that Morse code was fairly easy to send out, but it was very difficult to interpret. You remember him saying that?
Yeah.
Yeah. When so when you were raising kids, I'm sure you thought about and from let's see, Aunt Petey was born in 1951.
Oh,
Aunt Petey, 1950. So yeah, raising kids from 1950 through present day, you're still raising your four daughters. Did you think much about how different their childhood was from yours and the things they had?
no, because I made a lot of their clothes.
Oh, yeah,
You know, they went to the same school I went to,
that's right. Yeah.
St. Peter's, and everything was pretty well. But only I didn't wear no uniforms. We didn't have no uniforms
Hmm.
like they did later on.
How many different outfits did you get to have when you were growing up for school?
My mother made us each two dresses.
Hmm.
So while the ones get washed and ironed, we had the other one.
Okay, so you're saying that my mom's childhood was pretty similar to yours since you made their clothes and same school. Um, and you obviously only had one car. So you only had one car when you were raising kids, and then when you were a kid, you guys must have only had one car, right?
When I was a kid,
Yeah.
we didn't have a car. During the Depression, or before that, my dad and mom owned a car. And then when the Depression came, they could not afford the gas.
Oh, huh.
So the car was put in the garage. And there it was and rotted.
Really?
So us kids would go play in it and fight the wasps because the wasps were good.
Really?
Yeah. But, there it sat in the garage.
And it just eventually got towed away, or?
I guess I don't remember. I
Huh.
just remember it there. And then in 1940s, I guess we some friends told my mom, oh, he worked for the Ford company. And he said, Mrs. Wild, there's a good car coming in. It'd be a good buy for you. And so my mom and dad bought that Ford.
Mhm.
And it was almost brand new. And an elderly lady owned it. And she hardly drove it any.
Mhm.
And so Uncle Arnold was still home, and he'd always wash it and painted the wires so that the tires so they looked like white walls.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. And Uncle Arnold got drafted, and then my dad started driving again
And when did you say you bought that? They bought that car?
around 1940, I think.
Yeah. Huh. Hmm. You've done great. You've done great. I'm trying to think if there's any other specific questions that I'd like to ask you. See, this is good too, like not just for this podcast, but like for your great great grandkids. They might want to listen to this someday, or your great 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 grandkids.
Well, I could see he traveled around the world with President Hoover.
No, Grandpa did. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So what was life like when Grandpa was, well, yeah, let's kind of come back to that a little bit. So he was at Scott. He did participate in the World Food Survey, as it's called, with President Hoover, like you were talking about there. What other jobs did Grandpa have during the war?
He was just a radio operator.
Right. Yeah.
That was all. And he would travel to the different countries
Yes, when he was at Scott, like he wasn't training anymore, right?
Well, he was always a radio operator.
So when he was at Scott, I mean, he was operating the radios, but like, what was his 9 to 5, if you will? There, does that make
Just a
sense?
radio operator, and then he got transferred to Yuma, Arizona,
Okay, yeah.
and he was still on radio.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he would be picked to go to oh, Newfoundland
Mm-hmm.
and Greece
Yeah.
for radio operating, and he'd come back to Yuma, Arizona.
And when he was radio operating, he was always on the plane radio operating or sometime. Yeah. I guess what I was trying to ask is what kinds of like missions were these planes going on that he was on when he was like at Scott or at Yuma?
Oh, Yuma, just in different countries. I don't know what they would do just to see what was what. And
Yeah.
then he'd come back, and
Mm-hmm.
then he got transferred to I don't know where he went then. But then he got discharged in
And what year was Grandpa discharged?
1943 because
Um,
we got married in 44.
really? I thought it was more like 47,
Wait a minute, 46.
46.
We got married in 46, and so he got discharged at 45, and he stayed at home in Texas, and they remodeled his parents' home.
Mm-hmm.
So then he then he came to Belleville, and we made arrangements in 46 to get married.
And um, you were a little bit nervous or uncertain whether you'd be end up moving to Texas or whether he'd want to stay up in Belleville.
Well, I didn't care. I just took for granted we were moving to Texas.
Right.
But when we got engaged, my mother said, "Well, Audrey, you know, you're going to have to live in Texas." And just said, "Oh, no." He said, "We're not living in Texas."
Mm-hmm.
So that's when we came back to Belleville.
And the number one reason he didn't want to live in Texas was because of racism towards Hispanics, right?
It had problems,
Mm-hmm.
and I never really paid much attention to that. He would tell me if we had children, they might have a hard time
Mm-hmm.
living in Texas. And I really didn't pay that much attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they want to live in Texas.
So you said you didn't care whether you live in Belleville or 1,500 miles away. So I'm a little bit intrigued by that. I mean, that's a significant difference in the path of your life, being in the same area where you grew up versus being in Texas.
Well, when he came back and we got married, he went to school at St. Louis University on the GI Bill. And he went to school. And then when he got out of there, he was looking for a job. And he would pick up odd jobs, sell magazines or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got a job at the phone company,
Yep.
which was really good. I mean, yeah, it got advances, and he did very good there.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up as the supervisor phone company.
His career. Yep. But that was good, Grandma. I'm sure you're probably a little bit pooped after chatting nonstop for 2,700 seconds.
You probably think I could, after I finished talking to you, I think, oh, I should have told him this. I should have told
What's one thing that you're thinking of, like, oh, I wish I would have added that?
him. Well, right now, I
Okay.
after the other night when I talked to you, I thought, oh, I want to put down the note about our shoes having holes in them.
Yeah, no, that's a great little detail there.
Mhm.
One other thing sort of on point. So the Fireside Chat's famous for being on the radio. Do you remember listening to anything in particular on the radio when you were growing up?
The reaction?
No, just anything on the radio.
Well, mystery stories, and they say, only the shadow knows. But otherwise,
Was that the name of the show, Only the Shadow Knows, or it's something they would say often?
mystery story.
Yeah.
And the detective, you never saw him except the shadow. There was something happened, they'd say, only the shadow knows. And even my mother would watch it.
Really? Do you
Not
remember?
watch it, I mean,
Yeah. Would your whole family gather around at the radio, or
well, no, my dad usually was in a corner sleeping,
yeah?
and Arnold and Penny would be out with friends.
Hmm. So it didn't sound like you guys would crowd around the radio and listen to things. It wasn't a major part of your life
No.
growing up. Yeah. What was it like when I guess you got your first TV with Grandpa?
Our first TV was, I think, Aunt Leova and Leroy. I think when he left for service,
Hmm.
it was just a small TV, and we got it. And that was our first TV.
So do you remember anything in particular that you liked watching, or?
My mother would watch The Lady in White. It'd be about the nurse story and Betty Crocker
Hmm.
and stuff. But there was nothing I didn't have time.
Hmm.
I would come home from school, and if I had a part-time job at the dime store at one time, then I would catch a bus and go to work.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Different topic, but I remember you saying something about this once, but so obviously Belleville is not exactly the South. To what extent was there any segregated restaurants or anything like that when you were growing up?
We never really paid attention to that kind of stuff, Mike. You went to your restaurant, and the blacks never did bother about going in.
Hmm.
You know, they colored, and in school, I went to school at St. Mary's, and there was a couple of them in there.
Hmm.
And when I went to high school, there were a couple of blacks, and they were just included in everything.
Yeah. Hmm.
On the basketball girls team, and they you never heard of people being against them.
Really?
There,
Hmm.
there just wasn't nothing like
Just not in people's minds.
associated with you.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, again, that was great. Let me see if there's anything. I guess, oh, I wanted to ask, when the war ended, I mean, the US had been in World War II for 4 years. What sort of things were on your mind when the war ended?
We were happy.
Yeah.
On the living room floor, listening to the radio, and they said that the war ended,
Hmm.
and we were all real happy about it.
When the atomic bombs were dropped, what do you remember thinking anything about those?
Well, it was scary.
Uh-huh.
But I guess we just didn't. It was going to end the war. That's all we thought about.
Yeah.
It ended the war.
And Grandpa went to Hiroshima after the fact, right? As part of his World Food Survey, and saw just the telegraph poles and everything else dissolve, right?
I don't know what Grandpa saw. He went to different countries,
Yeah.
but he went to first he went to Europe, and he went to Germany and India, China, and all them. When he came back, then he said, "Well, we're going to the Pacific," and then they went to the Philippines and all these.
How long was that trip around the world that he took?
I'd say it took a month.
Oh, really? I always imagine it being longer, but yeah.
Well, and then when it was all done with, Hooker had a big dinner for him in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Honolulu, and had a big dinner, and they each got a bracelet given to him with his signature on,
Right.
and a certificate for all the different countries they went to,
Mm-hmm.
or all that. So where it goes after I'm dead and gone, I don't know.
Sure, the girls have already made signups. So okay, good. Those are all my thoughts. Question: do you have anything else? Like I said, we can definitely do this again too, and just keep. So, like I said, we can do this again too for just different topics that you might want to record for posterity.
Well, I'd like to know what this is. Little Luke seemed to know about it. I don't know. You belong to an organization.
The podcast, you mean, that I'm talking about, or what? Like this? Yeah. So this the podcast is called The Speech Guys. So with this radio show that's on the internet, anyone can do it. Like you can make your own podcast because it's sort of like if someone publishes a book, right? They have to go to a publishing company, right?
I don't know.
Well, yeah, of course. You can't just publish unless you have your own printing press. You can't make your own book. But with the internet, anyone can put anything on the internet, which is part of what makes it so dangerous in many ways. Regardless, so we record ourselves talking about different things. So some other podcasts that exist that I listen to, um, yeah. So one podcast I listen to is called The Word on Fire Show. So that's like a religious podcast. There's one called the Nugget Climbing Podcast where they talk about climbing. There's one called Unexplained. Got one called Unexplained Mysteries where it's like supernatural type stuff. So it's anything. It's just like something that's on TV, except only audio, obviously.
Now you belong to an organization.
Well, it's me and 3 other friends that do this. It's not an organization. Yeah. We used to like history and thinking about things in the past and stuff like that.
Oh, no, Luke, he seemed to know all about it.
Yeah, so he must have listened to it. There's one episode we did on JFK's speech, "We choose to go to the moon." So I don't know, maybe he must have listened to that one and sounds like it.
When I was saying that, he seemed to know all about it.
Okay, well dang, I'm flattered then.
No. He's a good kid.
Mm-hmm.
I hope he stays.